Good afternoon. I'm actually Chris Colbert, and this is Ian Rose, so we're kind of going in opposite order of introductions. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about JupyterLab, which is the next generation user interface Project Jupyter, and Ian's going to do some live demos. He's the unfortunate one today. Hopefully they all work, but we're pretty stable now, so I've got confidence. By show of hands, I kind of want to get an idea. How many people have heard of JupyterLab before this talk? Awesome. You should have in this conference, or we're not doing our job. How many people have used JupyterLab? Okay. How many people have written extensions for JupyterLab? Awesome. Pretty good. Okay. So of those same people that have used JupyterLab, how many switched from the Classic Notebook? How many are still using both Classic Notebook and JupyterLab? Okay, about half and half. Okay, so I want to start by talking a little bit about the motivation for why we wrote JupyterLab in the very beginning, both from a developer perspective and from an end user perspective. From a developer perspective, I think the case is pretty compelling. How many people have tried to write extensions in Classic Jupyter Notebook? Yeah, a couple. It's kind of hard because it's kind of just a JavaScript API that's there. There's no really delineation between public and private API. It's one global namespace. It's easy to have your code, stomped on by other people's code. And whatnot. And so we really wanted to do a better job and bring the experience for developers and extension authors, kind of into the modern JavaScript world. But from a user-facing perspective, there's a lot more that we could do. The classic Jupyter Notebook kind of evolved to be more than just notebooks. We have the file browser tree. We've got obviously the actual notebooks. It grew to have in it a terminal, so you could actually execute real terminal things on your machine, whatever was hosting the Jupyter Notebook server. There are other things like text editors and whatnot. And these were kind of all great, and they helped you achieve your workflow and do your work. But they were just kind of there. You didn't have any flexibility about how you arranged your workspaces, how you set up your workflow. And really, we had building blocks, but that's kind of all we gave you. And there was no way to assemble them into kind of the workflow you wanted. So what we wanted to do with JupyterLab was kind of take this, what we call building blocks plus, and give you a way to work with those building blocks in a flexible but also integrated manner. So rather than just having a notebook in a browser tab, which you may pull next to a text editor in a browser tab, but those things otherwise would operate only independently. They weren't integrated with each other. They couldn't talk to each other. We wanted to fix that. And so what we needed to do is give you an environment that brought all those things under one roof. And we wanted to do that using modern JavaScript development practices. So we use TypeScript, NPM, Yarn, React, Phosphor.js, tools you know, some you might not know. We also wanted to give you a clean model view separation. So rather than extensions in the classic Jupyter Notebook where it's just kind of jQuery and you have the DOM and that's what you get, we wanted to give you really well-delineated public APIs and private APIs. And by using TypeScript, we can actually enforce those with the compiler. So if you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, the compiler will tell you that. And that's actually a really, really valuable tool when you're first learning to develop extensions. And also, if you're deploying an environment that has lots of developers that are working on a shared code base, typing becomes almost invaluable in those sorts of situations. We also wanted to create an environment that's fully extensible by third parties. And by that, we don't mean that we give you JupyterLab and we can do special things, and then you can go off and do some things that we've defined a priori and kind of wall you off in your own little walled garden. We built JupyterLab from the ground up under the premise that no one extension is more privileged than any others. So what we're going to show you today, especially in the live demos, is something about 60 plus components that we built into the core of JupyterLab, but each one of those core components is actually just an extension to JupyterLab that's built on top of the same extension APIs that you have access to as third-party extension developers. The other things we wanted to focus on, obviously, are high performance and high quality UI, UX, and design testing. High performance is a bit of a stickler of mine. I'm kind of a low-level UI guy, and so I really care about high-level performance. When you're using JupyterLab, we want you to not feel like you're in a typical web application and you're dealing with lag, network responses that are slow, that sort of thing. We want you to feel like you're in a desktop environment and have that level of response. Same thing for the high quality UI, UX design and user testing. We don't want this to feel like an application just kind of thrown together, by a couple college kids on a weekend. Like, we do user testing, we do UI, UX research, and we're doing the best we can to make it a professional environment for you to do your work. And so with that, we built JupyterLab, which really gives you an integrated experience. This is a screenshot from this morning. So if you're running on the newest version of JupyterLab, 0.34.2, I think was released this morning, this is what you can see. So this is our polished UI. We've got our notebooks. This is the same notebook, that you get in Classic Notebook. All the functionality in Classic Notebook is there. But we have a bunch of other stuff, which Ian will demo, which is not available in the classic notebook. But one point that I want to drive home is the .ipynb format has not changed. Neither have any of the Jupyter protocols. So JupyterLab is simply a new front end that we've built on top of the already existing Jupyter stack. So the protocols are the same, the file formats are the same, nothing has changed. All of that's still exactly the same. So where are we today in terms of JupyterLab development? So we kind of include this slide and update it in all the talks. So if you go back and you look at the original JupyterLab talks we've done, or the ones that were earlier on in 2018, this slide keeps being updated. So as of today, we're about 3.5 years into development. We've got over 100 contributors now to JupyterLab, over 13,000 commits, which is more than the original classic Jupyter Notebook, 3,400 releases. This is a pretty impressive number, but it's kind of due to the fact that everything is a small little NPM package, so it's kind of a byproduct of front-end coding and JavaScript nowadays, but it's still a pretty big number. And we've got over 60 core components. This is not including third-party extensions or extensions that I would say the core Jupyter team develops and maintains, but are not part of the original, the core distribution. You would have to install these extensions separately. We have full support for Jupyter Notebooks. Again, the ipynb format has not changed. We support notebooks, terminals, text editors, file browsers, code consoles. All of these live under the same roof in the same browser tab. We've got, again, the extension architecture that enables anyone to add capabilities to JupyterLab with all the same privileges that the core components have. In addition, we built an API that allows you to integrate your own extensions with our core components and have the two communicate with each other. So those communication pathways are built into the APIs of JupyterLab. It's not something that you have to go in and reinvent the wheel to get your own extensions to talk to each other or to get your extensions to talk to ours. We have built-in rich handling for different data types, such as PDF files, CSV files. If you were in the tutorial or the training earlier in the week, you saw how to create extensions for handling MP4 files. I think we've probably got a dozen or 2 dozen different file formats right now that we support out of the box. A big announcement, JupyterLab is now ready for use, so we've removed the beta tag from JupyterLab. So if you're a user of JupyterLab, we're calling JupyterLab stable. There's still probably going to be some changes to the developer API, but from the perspective of an end user of JupyterLab, you can consider JupyterLab 1.0 at this point. You can use it today, conda install from the Conda Forge channel. You can conda install JupyterLab, and you're going to get the latest release. And we've got a URL there to read the docs pages. So who is using JupyterLab today? So last year at this conference, we called JupyterLab beta. Today, we're just calling it a 1.0. In that time, these are a slew of companies that are using JupyterLab. If you'd like your name added to this slide, feel free to ping us on Twitter or whatnot. But JupyterLab is getting adoption in both the academic research institutes as well as big business enterprises. I've got a couple of just some screenshots here that were kindly put in the open domain by some of the bigger users of JupyterLab. So this is a screenshot that was actually from a talk that was given by Adam Thornton from the LSST, which is there he is. Thank you. Thank you for open sourcing this image. So I thought this was a great image of a really large institution. You have, 3,500 developers? Was that the number? Using JupyterLab?
No, there are about 150 people in data management. We've so far had a peak concurrent user of only about 100.
Okay.
We don't have all that many developers. We're going to have a lot of data.
Gotcha. Okay. So off by an order of magnitude. No one's counting. And then this is from the Esri folks, the ArcGIS. I don't think he's in the audience today, but this is another great example of taking a large organization and them taking JupyterLab and customizing it to their workflow needs. These are the same applications from 2 very different organizations, look very different. All those 3 screenshots I've shown so far are very different from each other. But that kind of gives you an idea of the level of customization that you can take JupyterLab and basically mold it to suit your needs. And so with those slides behind us, actually one more slide. So talk about some recently added features. So these are not all of the features we've added since last year, but these are the salient features that probably affect you as users the most. So we've got the concept of workspaces and tree handlers now in JupyterLab. So you can actually take one JupyterLab instance and open a bunch of different files, save it as a workspace, change your URL, open up a bunch of different other files, save that as a workspace, and then you can both share those URLs and have other people open them and see that workspace, and also switch back and forth yourself and save and restore your workspaces. So that's a really handy feature if you're using JupyterLab a lot and kind of context switching between different projects. We now support kernel completion in text files. So if you've got a kernel running and you attach your kernel to the text editor that you're editing, and the kernel supports completion, you can actually get tab autocomplete based on the real-time code that's running in your kernel. We now support persistent collapsing of cell inputs and outputs. We've had collapsing of cell inputs and outputs since day 0 in the JupyterLab notebook, but now those are persisted across session reloads. We've got a comprehensive pluggable menu system now. That's, I guess, a bit more semantic. We've taken some time and some UX research to put things in the menu bar in the right location and allow you as extension authors to actually contribute semantically relevant action menus to the menu bar. Added settings for controlling a font family and font size. We've updated or created a new user interface for managing third-party extensions. So before, you had to install and uninstall and remove extensions from the command line only. We now have an experimental extension that allows you to do that from the UI of JupyterLab itself. Dynamic theme loading, and then a bunch of new extensions that are third-party extensions insofar as they're not included in the core distribution of JupyterLab, but they're core supported insofar as they're part of the JupyterLab organization. And Ian's going to demo those for us right now.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
All right. So it looked like most of the people in the room had at least seen JupyterLab before. But for those who maybe haven't, this is the overall layout. We've got something like a file browser on the left-hand side that's collapsible, and then we've got a menu up at the top. Down here is at the bottom is the new status bar, which Chris alluded to. This is something that the interns at Cal Poly have been working on this summer, and it's very exciting. And then this vast expanse in the middle is the main work area where you can sort of customize your activities to your needs. But as we've been trying to stress very much, we are still very much oriented around notebooks. These notebooks are the same file type that the classic notebook uses. Anything that you use in the classic notebook or in the classic notebook interface should transfer over fairly easily to JupyterLab with little or no modifications. Okay, let's see. This is one of our basic demos showing the Lorentz differential equations. For some reason, I don't have a kernel. Live demos, right? Okay. So one of the things that the flexibility of this layout system allows us to do is open up the same notebook in multiple views. So right here, I've right-clicked on the tab for this notebook, and I can say, hey, let's open a new view for this notebook. And now I've opened up this notebook twice. It allows me to scroll around independently, but these really are the same notebook. So if I edit something over here, it should show up on the other side. Okay, great. We also have drag and drop for cells. So we can move cells around within a notebook by clicking and dragging them. And we can also drag and drop between different notebooks, which will copy them. The flexibility of this layout system also allows us to open output areas in new tabs. So if I right-click on this output area of this Lorentz attractor here, I should be able to select Create New View for Output. This pops out this output area into a new tab, which can then be interacted with in the same way that it can in the notebook. And if I switch this over to single document mode, I've made something that looks more like a pseudo dashboard system, where I've got some sliders and the resulting image from the Lorentz attractor. And then if I pop right back out, now I've got the same layout that I had before once I left single document mode. But JupyterLab is not just notebooks now. We also have terminals, which allow us to do things like, manage view the resource usage on our machine. We have text files, which we can edit as you would normally. The ability to have live data models also allows us to do interesting things like open up the same file with multiple different viewers. So one thing I can do that a lot of people find very useful is have the same file open, the same markdown file open with a text editor and also with a markdown renderer. So we can start making a file like how to write Python, and it should render over here. And we can do things like code fences, and it will render nicely on the other side. One of the things that we're very excited about is we also have the ability to attach consoles to text files as well as to notebooks. So if I right-click here, I can create a console for this editor. It will ask me to select a kernel. I'll select Python 3. And once I have this console here, I can actually take code from this text editor and by pressing Shift-Enter, send it to the text editor. And so you saw down here, I've actually executed this print hello world. So we can also, do things like make some plots. And by executing this code block, hopefully, well, I didn't quite, what's that? Interesting. There we go, thank you. We can do things like create plots and can also embed them in line. And so now I've created this plot and embedded it in this markdown document. So I think this is kind of neat. It's sort of a more lightweight, console-aware document than the notebook. It allows us to author interactive documents in Markdown rather than in the full-blown notebook interface. But the notebook, obviously, is still the more flagship way of doing this. We've written probably about a dozen different readers for various file types. So if I open up this directory, we've got image viewers. We can render Vega and Vega Lite. We have this really fun GeoJSON viewer, which allows us to, so GeoJSON is a JSON format that encodes geographic information. So if I open this up with a text editor, you should see this lovely and difficult to read JSON, but this GeoJSON viewer knows how to parse that and put it on a map. So we've got a list of museums in Washington, D.C. plotted up on this map. Because, again, we've got a live data model, I can open up this Vega Lite file with several different viewers. So I can open this up with a rendered JSON viewer, which shows the actual data in this Vega Lite file. I can also open it up with the text editor. And if I edit this text editor, or if I edit this text, so I can say maybe make this a circle, it will live update on this side. So the ability to have live data models that are all in sync with each other really allows for some interesting interactions. So one of the features that we're very excited about is the new CSV viewer that Chris has written. You may have seen this iris data set before. It's not very large, but the CSV viewer is written with performance in mind, so it can handle much bigger data sets than just this iris data set. So we've prepared a CSV with, I think, 1.2 million rows in it, which I'm actually going to open with LibreOffice here. And you can see this progress bar down there. Still going, and maybe I'll try to navigate to the same file over here. And this one, okay. All right, here's all 1.2 million rows. I can scroll around, moves pretty quickly, and there it is at the bottom. So the reason this is so fast is that it's lazily loaded and lazily rendered and allows us to, and sort of smartly done, which allows us to open this file in much more quickly and much more smoothly than Excel or LibreOffice can handle. I can vamp for a few more seconds until this maybe succeeds. Oh, nope, it failed. Okay. So we'll close that and go back here. So this is the overall experience with JupyterLab, but we're really excited to see the type of extensions that other people make. We've really made this, we've tried very hard to make this an extensible system with a well-documented API so that other people can write cool viewers, can write new document readers, and come up with new interactions that will sort of scratch your own itches. So I wanted to spend a few minutes highlighting some newish extensions. This here is a new core extension in JupyterLab. It is an in JupyterLab user interface for extensions. So right here, you can see the list of extensions that I currently have installed. If you're interested in talking about any of these, you can grab me afterwards, and I'm happy to do so. One of our tutorial extensions is to make something that creates XKCD comics and puts it in a panel. And we, at the end of that tutorial, have people publish their XKCD extensions. So I'm going to check and see how many people have published XKCD extensions. It looks like about a dozen people have done this tutorial and published them to NPM. So probably all of these work, but I really can't say for sure. One that I'm fairly proud of is this GitHub extension. It adds a new file browser to the left-hand side, which allows you to browse GitHub. So we can go to the JupyterLab organization, and this is the list of repositories in the JupyterLab organization. We can go in here. This is the repository that tracks all the various videos that we have in our documentation. And I can open this one. And here's an example that shows really a similar thing to what I did a few minutes ago. So this is a bit of a meta demo. This video viewer, by the way, is something that we did on Tuesday in the tutorial. And this is up. This tutorial is also available on our org right here in case anybody wants to learn how to make a video renderer in JupyterLab. So I mentioned a moment ago that Brian Granger has some interns at Cal Poly who are working on some neat extensions this summer. They are working on, let's see which ones I have available right now. They are working on a new interface for cell tools and for cell tags rather, for manipulating and editing cell metadata. They've also been putting some work into a table of contents extension, which allows us to navigate around long notebooks via a table of contents on the left-hand side here. They've also been making a really nice, a really nice keyboard shortcut editor, which allows you to change around the default keyboard shortcuts for your JupyterLab installation. Previously, in order to change keyboard shortcuts, you had to mess around writing JSON. Nobody likes writing JSON. This is a much nicer way of doing it. So we're very excited about that. And then I mentioned a few minutes ago, we've also got this nice new status bar. So it does things like tell me what the line and column number are in my notebook cells and text editors. It gives me information about running kernels. It tells me which document is currently active. And so these are all coming along nicely and, and may be incorporated into the core at some point in the future. But right now they live on as third-party extensions. Okay, so those are most of the things that I wanted to demo here. Did I miss anything? I think we're good. Okay, so we wanted to close out by briefly discussing some of the features that we're working on in the near future that we hope to get in pretty soon. We want to integrate Monaco, which is the text editor that powers VS Code into JupyterLab. This will give us the language server protocol, which is a really nice interface to text completions, and will really supercharge our ability to do text completions or tab completions in your notebooks and text files. We want to get unified undo and redo working in notebooks so that just pressing Control-Z will undo all text changes you might make, but it will also properly undo things like moving cells around, deleting cells, adding new cells, and we want that to all be in the same undo stack. We also want to have a better unified find and replace system among the various document types that we support. We're also working on developing some tools for working with sensitive data. My background is in open source and in open science, so the idea of sensitive data is a little bit foreign to me, but there are contexts in which you're dealing with medical data or financial data and whatnot, at least so people tell me. And so there are contexts in which it's important to be able to treat sensitive data correctly. And then sort of the really big fish that we're trying to land is real-time collaboration. We've been working hard on it for quite some time now. We think we're getting closer, and once we land that in the core, then I think we're gonna send out the message that we consider our developer APIs to be stable, and that's when we encourage people to write extensions now, but that's when we're really going to encourage people to write extensions because you're going to have to update less often. So with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions. Thanks to all these people and our funding sources. They're all great.
Yes.
Yeah. Adam.
So from what I'm seeing is in general, the pattern for building a dashboard, make a workspace, lay it out like you want to do output only cells. Is that a reasonable way to go about it?
That would be a reasonable way to go about it. There are other concerns with dashboards, like a full JupyterLab install has things like access to the file system and access to running commands, and potentially with the dashboard you might want to restrict some of that. So I don't want to give that a full-throated endorsement, but in certain contexts, I think that would be a fine way to go about it. Other questions? Yeah.
More of a technical Python question. What's the best way to run async inside of JupyterLab?
Ooh, Matthias has been doing some great work on that recently. I don't see him in the room. So which language are you
Python.
in Python?
Yeah, because the async loop is taking.
Yeah, so Matthias is trying to merge an enormous PR into IPython that handles, makes the REPL a more async REPL, and it's pretty neat. I don't know how he did it, but it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Were any changes made on the server side for server extensions or some of the different?
There were some additions. It is the same server. You pip install the exact same server, and then we add some extensions to it. So JupyterLab is in effect a notebook server extension.
Sure, but the actual server extension API, is there anything that have to be added?
Nope.
So they're still the same.
Yep.
All still the same. Yep. There was no backwards breaking changes that had to be made to any of the backend stuff in Jupyter. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks.